Hello there. Skilling Open quarterfinal stage, and it's the second day of matches. On the first day, Magnus Carlsen, he won against Anish Giri. It was a very close match, 4-game rapid match, and it was decided in the last game. First 3 were drawn, but then Magnus won. Today, the same thing happened. The first 3 games were drawn, but now Anish Giri had white in the 4th and final game. So the battle lines were drawn. Anish needs to win this game to force the tiebreak. Very easy to understand. But he's black against the world champion. So what does he do? Well, he plays the Sicilian. A fighting opening. But Magnus, well, being fully aware of what he needs, he plays c3, which is a very solid line, the Alpine Sicilian. And especially, it's a tough nut for black to crack. It's not difficult to equalize, but it can be difficult to get winning chances with black. Giri goes with d5, an active line, and after d4, he doesn't go for one of the absolute main lines. And I guess the reason for that is that they are, well, kind of solid and difficult to get something. So it goes for this g6 line, which people play if they want to win. But let's see what Magnus does. He plays knight f3, bishop g7, fianchetto to the bishop, knight a3. This knight will jump into the b5 square. And even after c takes d4, we can jump here because we're threatening to win the queen. Anish stops the threat, but there's bishop e3. So white is getting pretty fluid development. Of course, this can't be taken because of the hanging queen. And we will take next on d4. Now, if you want to hold on to the pawn, e5, that looks very dangerous. White is getting a lot of free moves here. We can take with a pawn on d4. I can imagine a move such as bishop c4 being very dangerous because you can't take it. There's going to be a check here. And if you go here, there's either knight g5 or this first. So I imagine this line is pretty dangerous for black. So even though he's in a must-win situation, he did not go for this. And I suspect it's just a bad line. So he goes knight f6. And Magnus gets the pawn back. Bishop takes d4. Okay, Giri castles and Magnus prepares to do the same. Bishop to e2, bishop g4. But first he plays a4. If he castles immediately, this bishop takes f3, and we can't take with the bishop because this knight would hang. So first he plays a4, protecting the knight. And e5 now by Giri. He's trying to get active play, but to do that he is actually sacrificing this pawn here, which Magnus accepts. We have e4. Okay, trying to put some pressure on white, who hasn't castled. But the cost is a queen trade, and Magnus is quite happy to get that. He takes the queen and moves the knight away, knight after d4. Bishop goes back. Bishop to c4, attacking the knight. And, well, not yet castling. Don't see anything particularly wrong with that, but Magnus goes g3 here, hitting the knight. And perhaps the knight doesn't have a whole lot of great squares. I mean, this is out of play. This allows too many trades and then damages the structure. So rook c8 was preferred by Anish, but then Magnus can take on f7. Reminds me a little bit of the Sevilla variation of the Grunfeld. Those that know about that one. That's a different story. And now we take on f4. And Magnus is now up 2 pawns. But Giri does have the bishop pair, and he's banking on being able to create something with the bishop pair. Let's see how that happens. First he retreats with the king. And white goes to knight b3. Note that we can't do this if takes. We're getting stuff back, even though if you take this, I can take the knight. So we're not losing any material here for white. Knight back to c7, and now finally on move 20 the world champion castles. Normally we see that a lot sooner, but white was busy winning some pawns here. Knight takes b5, and again we cover the rook here. Anish gets one pawn back, but rook e1 immediately targeting this pawn, and bishop back to d4. Magnus is quite happy to trade. He only needs a draw to advance. He trades the pair of rooks here and plays bishop e5, protecting the pawn. But Anish is getting some counterplay. Rook into a2. But Magnus plays knight c5. There's a trade. And Magnus gets another pawn. So he's inching closer to the draw with every move here, with every trade. The king comes to f7. And now a cheeky move, c4. Attacking the rook. Rook to e2. And first Magnus plays knight d6. Yeah, it wasn't easy for black to find a square for the rook. If you go anywhere else, I imagine there's a check and taking the pawn. And that's a move anyway, so yeah, I'm not sure if Anish could have kept the rook on, but feels like that should give slightly better chances of a swindle. But after this check, Magnus happily took the rook and now took the pawn on b7. And now still up a pawn, and it's going to be really hard to create anything here for Anish. He finally gets the pawn back, but now there are only 2 pawns left each, so we are going to need some extra endgame magic for anything to happen here for black. King f2, protecting the pawn. h6, note that you can't just attack the pawn and hope to win it, because knight d3 kicks the king away and the pawn is safe. So here Anish played h6, but it turns out it's simply not enough material here. Same thing, a little bit of back and forth. The knight finally comes to e4, because Anish can't repeat for the third time. Bishop back to d7, bishop f5, and yeah, I mean, Anish is only playing this out because it's an Armageddon. He can maybe play for time and hope for some miracles, but there's nothing happening. h5 here, strong move by Magnus, simplifying to an endgame. Even if he didn't have this pawn, it's an easy draw with an h pawn. So this, well, fittingly ended with only the bare kings and yet another draw for Anish Giri. So Magnus does advance to the semi-final, as was expected, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see who his opponent will be. And the semi-final will start tomorrow. We haven't looked at the other matches, so we're not going to spoil them just yet, but I'll see you soon in another video. Thank you. Bye bye.